Hello and welcome to this training video on the SURFiR Companion Remote. The SURFiR is designed to function as an extension of our TI panel, overcoming some of the shortcomings or perceived shortcomings of tablet or phone devices, namely the lack of a one-handed form factor with tactile feedback for common used functions such as channel surfing. The SURFiR works as an extension of the RTI panel in the sense that it will stay in sync with the current activity of RTI panel. It will be referencing how this works in conjunction with RTI panel. It should be noted you could set this up to also work with virtual panel, our application for PC-based control as well. So when you're using RTI panel on a Apple iOS or Android-based device, you can pick up your iPad, for example, and queue up a Blu-ray or DVD movie, and then you can shut your iPad down, set it down, or use it for some other function, and pick up the SURFiR remote and hit the pause button, for example. And since the system is tracking the current activity, the system will know that it should pause the DVD or Blu-ray player as opposed to another source such as the cable or satellite box. So you can seamlessly transition from using your RTI panel app to the SURFiR Companion Remote. Now, the way that these stay in sync, the RTI panel app and the SURFiR remote, is via an RTI XP series processor. We'll be going through some of those different options here over the next few minutes. So in reality, the XP series processor is tracking the current activity so that the SURFiR sends out the appropriate command based on the currently selected source. So the SURFiR includes a dual RF chip, so we can do 2.4 gigahertz communication or 433 megahertz communication. That's set up in the Integration Designer software. We'll take a look at that here later in the video on how that is done. And another unique feature on the SURFiR is a remote finding function. So if the remote, for example, is lost or stuck in the couch cushion, customer can't locate it, you could have a button on the RTI panel interface on an iPad, for example, that will initiate a remote finding audible beeping noise on the remote control. So the homeowner can locate the remote based on that audible noise, and as soon as they hit a button on the SURFiR or press a function on their iPad RTI panel app, that will turn off that beeping noise. So it's that feature in particular, though, does require the use of the 2.4 gigahertz Zigbee feature, because it requires communication from the RTI processor through a transceiver to the remote to initiate the finding function. So it should be noted that while the SURFiR remote does incorporate a dual RF chip, if the remote finding feature is important for the installation, you must use 2.4 gigahertz Zigbee to utilize that feature. Some additional insight in regards to the tracking we discussed on the last slide. Really the way that the SURFiR is designed to work is that you can initiate an activity from your RTI panel app, such as the example given earlier, queuing up a Blu-ray or DVD movie and putting the iPad down and picking up the SURFiR remote and then controlling your Blu-ray or DVD player. It's really not designed to work optimally going the other way as far as having the iPad track what the SURFiR remote is doing. And that's just due to some inherent limitations with how the Apple iOS and Android devices function, in that if the app, so using an iPad for example, if the iPad is shut down or the RTI panel app is closed on the iPad, there isn't a way for the system to track what is happening when that application is shut down or the iPad is powered down. So it's not going to track or cache the activities and remember them when you open the app. So the point is, it's not going to be a bulletproof solution tracking from the SURFiR remote to the iPad. It's really designed to work by setting up an activity or selecting an activity from the iPad and then transitioning to using the SURFiR remote for channel surfing. Additionally, the SURFiR does not have direct IR capability on it, as it gives you basically the same control capability you get on an RTI panel app. Of course, you do not get IR control from an iPad or an Android device directly. Similarly, you do not get that control with the SURFiR remote. So it does require an RTI XP series processor in order to work properly. And it should be noted that you need Integration Designer 8.5 or higher in conjunction with the latest firmware on the RTI XP series processor. So verify you have 8.5 or higher for Integration Designer software and that you're using the latest firmware. When you open the box for the SURFiR remote, you're going to find, of course, the SURFiR remote. It does come with AAA batteries to power up the remote. There is also a security screw to close or seal the battery compartment, and there's also a security screwdriver to included in the box. So that's an optional usage item there. You also get labels for the remote. There's actually 200 function or activity buttons that are included with each SURFiR remote. You can label on the front of the remote. There are 8 customizable or labelable hard buttons on the top of the remote control. You can label those with any of the 200 labels included. And also on the back of the SURFiR remote, you can give the remote a location identification. So you might have 3 or 4 or more of these SURFiR remotes throughout an installation. You can identify, one is a living room remote, one is a master bedroom or guest bedroom remote, etc. So you can identify what each one is used for and its proper location should they ever get mixed up. The status LED on the upper left-hand corner of the SURFiR remote. Now, the meaning of what that status LED means is also identified in the owner's manual that's included in the box with the SURFiR. But walking through that briefly, a green indication indicates that a command is being transmitted. So when you push a button, you should see the green LED light up momentarily. If you see a red slow blink, that indicates that the battery is getting low. If it's blinking fast, it means the battery is critically low. And then a red-green alternating blink is what you should see when you're in configuration mode, which we'll walk through some of the details of configuration mode as we talk about Integration Designer programming momentarily. As indicated earlier, with the use of the SURFiR, you do need to use an RTI XP series processor. So some of the current processors that we offer, the XP3, the XP6, and the XP8S, as long as you're using an XP series processor, you can use the SURFiR remote, as we mentioned earlier, again, using the 433 megahertz or 2.4 gigahertz frequencies. The caveat there is if you want to use the remote finding function, again, you need to use the 2.4 gigahertz version. Now we'll take a brief look at the programming aspects of the SURFiR in Integration Designer. Please keep in mind that we go to great lengths to maintain continuity in the programming process using Integration Designer. So much of what you're doing in programming the SURFiR is the same as programming other RTI remotes and in-wall products. So we'll be focusing in this video on some of the unique aspects of programming the SURFiR remote. So we're starting from a file containing an XP series processor, as you'll see in the left-hand side in the system workspace, along with a configuration for RTI panel for iPad. And at this point, we'll be adding a SURFiR remote for a companion product to RTI panel. So using Integration Designer 8.5 or higher, we're going to go to the Device menu and Add New. Scroll through to the Apps section where you'll find the SURFiR Companion remote. Go ahead and click on that and give the device a name. At this point, we now have the SURFiR remote added to our system file. Now, taking a brief look at some of the settings here by right-clicking on the icon of the SURFiR remote in the system workspace and clicking Properties. For output, here's where we determine which frequency we're going to be using for communication. So based on whether you have an RM433 connected to your XP series processor, or whether or not you're using the XP3 with the integrated Zigbee antenna, or an XP6 or XP8S with the ZM24 Zigbee transceiver, you'll set the RF output mode accordingly. Again, as mentioned earlier, if you plan on using the remote finding feature available on the SURFiR remote, you need to select Zigbee as your output type. And then in cases where there are multiple XP series RTI processors, make sure that you specify which processor this particular SURFiR will be communicating with. In this case, we have a single XP6 processor, which is the default processor. Then you can also go to the Key Labels tab. As indicated earlier in this video, the SURFiR comes supplied with function and source labels, actually 200 of those. They're identified in the drop-down menu, so for reference as you're programming, you can identify the proper functions that you're going to have assigned to those 8 customizable buttons on the SURFiR remote. So for example, say we have satellite as part of our configuration. Go ahead and label satellite. Click OK. Now I have an indicator in your programming environment that the upper left button is going to have a satellite sticker attached to it. Skipping ahead a bit, I've gone through and actually labeled all of the 8 customizable buttons based on what I need for the specific application. And once finished with that, I can click OK. Note that you can always go back and select the properties and adjust those key labels at any time. So we've labeled them, they're indicated now, the proper labels on the remote control. Note that the SURFiR does not give feedback as to what the current page is or activity that you're on. So in most cases it's recommended that you have specific functions rather than source activities on your SURFiR remote, being that you're not going to see feedback as to what is the currently selected page or source that you're on. But that said, you can label these customizable labels to be activities. As I have on the top row here, I have satellite, DVD, tuner, and cable. So if I am doing that, it may be a good idea to make those keys global, which is the same process as with other RTI products. You can right click and make the key global. And then on the bottom row here I have a couple different lighting scenes, setup and adjust, which in my case might be, the command might be dependent on the currently selected source. So in other words, if I've selected Blu-ray or versus satellite or cable, that command might be different depending on what is the currently selected source. So setup might be set up for Blu-ray or set up for my cable box or satellite receiver. So here we have the labels that we want. You can then add pages if you want to have unique commands for different sources. And the process to do that is very similar to other RTI products. Go to the page menu and select new page and give the page a name. So once I've done that, I can go ahead from the IR database or RS-232 database or drivers database and add the appropriate commands. In the case of my satellite receiver, I'll pick a DirecTV receiver, start adding commands. You'll note that in the software it'll appear that the IR codes are residing on the SURFiR remote. In actuality, when we go to download, those commands are going to be shifted over to the XP series processor, and appropriate trigger codes will be assigned for those functions. So drag and drop as you would again with a traditional RTI remote or in-wall product. And note that here these commands now are unique to this page. Now, skipping ahead a bit, I've gone through and created commands for two source devices, one for my DVD player and one for my satellite receiver. Now, to create page links on the SURFiR remote itself, I simply right click, go to Create Macro, and do a page link from the command types in the macro editor. So on the DVD button, one of the commands I want it to do is, when I press that button, I want it to go to the DVD page. Similarly, when I hit satellite, I want it to navigate to the satellite page. Now, the way to get the RTI panel app and the SURFiR to stay in sync with the active source is through page linking. So for example, on my RTI panel application, from the home page, I have source devices for satellite and DVD or Blu-ray, and I can go about right clicking and creating a macro, and I can have not only the page flip happen on the RTI panel app, so when I click on the satellite icon on my home page of RTI panel, I can then have it navigate to my cable or satellite page, but then I can also at the same time indicate that I want my living room SURFiR remote to also flip to the satellite page, thus staying in sync with the current activity of my RTI panel app. Click OK. Now similarly, you can do that as well on the SURFiR remote. So if I click on editing the macro for my satellite button, you'll see, as I did earlier, I have the page flip to tell the SURFiR remote to change to the satellite page. I could also tell my RTI panel app to flip to the satellite page. The caveat, as indicated earlier, is that if the iPad is shut down or the RTI app is closed, it will not see that page flip indicator. So it will only work when the RTI panel app is open and operational. So we've just demonstrated how to stay in sync with our SURFiR remote and our RTI panel application. Once again, that's done through page linking, as we demonstrated in the macro editor. So I press the satellite icon on my iPad. It will change the page on my iPad to the cable or satellite page, and it will also then change the page on my SURFiR remote to my satellite page, which has the commands for my DirecTV satellite receiver. Now, lastly, I'm going to demonstrate how to set up a button for the remote finding function of the SURFiR remote. Again, in order to use this feature, you need to verify that your output type is in Zigbee mode. This will not work in 433 mode. Now, to demonstrate this feature, I've simply added a button to my remote and added text that says Find Remote. And what I'm going to do is create a macro on this button. So again, should my SURFiR remote get misplaced or lost, I can have an audible sound to help the user locate the remote. So I'm going to scroll down in the macro editor to the Find Remote option. In this case, it's the third from the bottom. And I identify, okay, which SURFiR remote do I want to locate? In this case, I only have one in my system file, which is labeled Living Room. And I have two options, Locate Remote and Stop Locating Remote. So I could put two separate buttons, one to locate the remote, and once I find it, another button to stop the audible noise that the remote will make. Or if you press a button on the SURFiR remote when you find it, that will stop the Find Remote beeping on the SURFiR itself. So in this example, I'm just going to add a locate function and click OK. And at this point, I've added that feature to my RTI panel app to help the customer locate their remote easily. Now, to finish up here, I'm going to go to the communication menu, Send to device. You'll see that the XP series processor needs to be updated. The XP series processor also is going to have the system file for the RTI panel app. There is no downloading, as we indicated in opening, for the SURFiR remote. You're given a configuration code, and in the last step of this training video you'll see the programming steps to enter this configuration code into the SURFiR remote to configure it for this system. So finally, a few notes on programming the configuration code into the SURFiR remote. Now, this information is available in the operating guide that comes included with the SURFiR remote. It's also on our dealer website. But you'll see that once you've done your programming, Integration Designer will give you a configuration code that needs to be entered into the remote. Now, there is no USB port like many of the other RTI product offerings to download from your computer. It's actually a configuration code that you'll be entering into the remote to give it an identification for the system file that you're working with. So when that code is generated in Integration Designer, as was demonstrated just a few minutes ago, you will then do the following steps as indicated in the operating guide and on your screen in front of you in order to get that configuration code into your SURFiR remote. And once these steps have been completed, you should be finished with the programming process.